Okay. So welcome to this Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee consultation call. I just need to read some specific wording for you, just so that we are clear on the consultation nature of this business. This meeting is not a formal meeting of the Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee, but is held as a consultation call by the interim chief executive under the delegated powers of the chief executive to take action in consultation with the members of the Rail. It says of the Rail North Committee, but of the Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee. Following a consultation call, the chief executive will take delegated actions having regard to the consultation. The agenda and reports for this consultation call have been made available to the public on the website, and the call is being live streamed on the Transport for the North website to ensure openness and transparency. Thank you. So welcome everybody. First of all, very pleased to see you all today, and I know we'll be terribly excited about the football match tonight, but I'll try not to let the meeting go as long as that. Welcome, Councillor Weymouth. I understand you're one of our new people. I'm not sure how many other new ones are on at the moment because I can't see from my screen, but welcome to you all, and welcome to the more seasoned members of our group. So first of all, I must ask for apologies. Are there any apologies? Gary, could you just fill us in on that?
Yes, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Hughes, Councillor Furnow and Councillor Crane.
Does anybody on the call know of anybody else's apologies that we need to enter into the minutes? I'll take that as a no, thank you. I'd like to ask us to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Could I ask for a proposer and seconder, please?
Happy to propose that, Chairman.
Thank you, Matthew. And would you second then, Councillor Fenton? Yep, thanks. I saw that nod. It's tricky, isn't it?
It takes ages to come off mute, but yes, that's fine. Thank you.
No, the technology is challenging, and the body's willing, but the technology doesn't always catch up. Or sometimes the technology catches up and you say the wrong thing, but that's another story. Is there anybody not in favour of the minutes? And if they could just indicate now, that would be helpful. I can't see anything, so I'm going to approve the minutes. Thank you very much, Gary. So our first item on the agenda today is the monthly operating report, which I believe is going to be presented by Tim Foster and possibly Ian Craven. So over to you, Tim.
Good morning. Good morning, all. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just introduce the monthly operating report very briefly, and then open up to any questions. The report that you've got in the pack is the latest version, which is for the operational month of May. And I think actually a number of the kind of the key activities that are referenced in the operating report for that month are actually on the agenda. So the big thing clearly has been the publication of the Williams Shapps review on rail. We've been doing a lot of work and to continue to do a lot of work in support of what's called the Manchester Recovery Task Force, but effectively how we restore services and then prepare for growth in the Manchester hub in the coming decades. And from a TFN strategy point of view, the big step forward in recent months has been the agreement of the draft decarbonisation strategy that this committee's discussed and provided some very helpful input in the development of, was signed off in draft at the March TFN board, and we're now out in consultation process, and my colleague Peter Cole is giving you an update on that later on the agenda. So I think actually I didn't have too much more to draw out other than to say that clearly The long-awaited integrated rail plan continues to have an effect on TfN operational business. As Tim will may want to say a bit about, the NPR programme continues at pace. There's a lot that we are doing whilst we wait for the outcome of the IRP. But across a number of fronts, the absence of the IRP is starting to have a bit of a drag on performance. We're still at quite an early stage of the operational year, but a number of the key performance indicators that we use to track and measure TfN progress are increasingly dependent on either on the IRP or the publication of the DFT Decarbonisation plan, as well as potentially the outcome of the spending review in the autumn. So there are a number of quite important dependencies in terms of our operational performance this year, and we will doubtless come back to those. Well, hopefully we will get publication of the integrated rail plan would be nice, but actually more clarity on the other things would actually then help us plan business for the rest of the year. I'll pause there, Chair, and just see if there are any particular questions that members have.
So, are there any questions for Tim? Councillor Jones, please.
Yes, thanks. Tim, I just, when it comes to the Manchester Recovery Task Force, I understand there's a special meeting, isn't there, coming up next week to look at the implications of the new timetable. Because I think what worries us, it's not so much the timetable itself. What worries us is that they're bringing this new timetable in on the basis that they're going to change the infrastructure in order to sort out some of the problems around the Manchester hub. But none of us, unless you are, none of us are aware what infrastructure proposals are being put on the table. So are you any the wiser? Do you know what proposals are there apart from the new timetable?
Yeah, I couldn't explain it to you in lots of detail, and Tim might want to comment in a little bit, but there are essentially a number of tranches of infrastructure proposed, and those are linked to changes in the timetable. My understanding of what's needed to make the 22 timetable work is relatively limited, and mainly around sort of upgrades to station platforms. And our understanding is that those things are not yet fully approved by the department, but the approval process is very live, and it's a big priority for the department. So I think I think we are reasonably confident, and we have good sight of the work that's going on to make sure the infrastructure is in place to be able to put a new timetable in from next year. The big question, and the one that we are continuing to work with the department really closely on, is where is the department and Network Rail on the bigger infrastructure changes that are required, both in the next 5 years and beyond that, in anticipation of HS2 and Northern Palace Rail, to really restore the level of timetable and growth that northern leaders think is needed. Tim, I don't know whether you want to add any more.
Yeah, I just think I'll add a little bit more. So there are 3 potential proposed tranches of work going out over the next decade plus, and it's Manchester and the sort of outskirts, the hinterland, because of course you've got trains coming in from Leeds, from Preston, etc. And what's been really important is, following on from an NTAC meeting which was held just over a month ago, Transport for the North and our analytics and economics team are now really baking in with some of the alternatives that are on the table that both Network Rail and Department have put forward. And we want to work through all those to make sure that we get the best outcomes for both Manchester partners and the north of England as well. And we haven't actually been at that stage sort of previously with building on the information and support that we can give. We haven't advocated a timetable change, though, in May currently at the moment, because of course there's still a lot of reviews going on, both with East Coast Main Line timetable change, of course also with the north of England sort of on the west side, and we have written to the department on those matters, so we're now waiting for a response. But yes, there's a meeting next week on the 14th taking place.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Jones, is that sufficient, or would you like to just ask anything else?
Yeah. Yes, it is. I want to thank both. Tim's a popular name today, isn't it? Both Tims for their comments. But can I just remind you both, just to remember that Network Rail reviewed the Manchester hub in 2009-10, and it was a lengthy document, and they showed all the infrastructure proposals that were needed to sort out the capacity issues in and around Manchester. So, if you like, if you were starting somewhere, you would say, well, what of those proposals over the last 12 years have actually been implemented and which haven't been implemented? Anyway, I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. Tim, this is Tim Wood. I'm not so sure that Leeds or Preston will be happy to be part of Manchester's hinterland. However, notwithstanding that, I now have Councillor Parish, Chater and Salter in the queue. So if I start with you, Steve.
Thank you. I wasn't sure where to infer from Tim Wood's emphasis on Manchester and the rest of the north that he felt the original plans were very much too Manchester centric. Obviously, it is in Manchester, but I mean too much to do with the impacts in Greater Manchester itself. I can't say pleasure, but if you remember, I did say from my vast experience of being a timetable with British Railways, more than 50 years ago now, no, just about 50 years ago, that I wasn't convinced by the modelling for the new timetable. I understand it's already been scrapped because it didn't work. So the sort of dismissive way of saying it's all done by micro modelling now, I feel a bit vindicated. What I'm after, first of all, is it they've already abandoned May next year, haven't they? Looking at December as a possibility. But just to confirm, none of these infrastructure things are going to be ready for then, are they?
No, none of them are going to be ready for then. There is still agreement that needs to happen. And that's when I talked previously about our analytical and economic work, working with Network Rail and the department to get the best solutions for Manchester and the north of England, because of course it is the Manchester Recovery Task Force work, but it does affect services coming right the way through Manchester. And I think there's another important thing to say as well, is that all the options are all still on the table. So referring there back to platform 1516 as well, that was initially part of the Northern Hub work. So the work we had completed, of course, was the Ordsall Cord, which sent those extra sort of 2 trains an hour down towards Piccadilly. But once you do that, you do need to complete the rest of the work that was originally envisaged, or something better. And that's where we want to really get into the detail to make sure that we do get that functionality and capacity through Manchester.
I think from our point of view, being parochial, Warrington and Liverpool, obviously the idea of splitting the Liverpool-Manchester via Warrington services at Warrington didn't go down very well, and operationally, to actually have something at Warrington is just another recipe for delays, so counterproductive on that. And I think, we actually had a report on how they might revise those services, and I'm not sure if that was taken into account either. That's only a few years ago. But that was in my response to the recovery plan. But also, the strangest thing, £100 million on the Ordsall Cord for 1 train an hour, just beggars belief, really. I understand Transpine and Express have already published next May's timetable, where, regardless of what happens with this recovery plan, they're already stopping the Newcastle to the airport service and Manchester Victoria. So even without the plan being agreed, there's an impact already by the talks.
So I can't talk on behalf of the talks, but at the moment with the East Coast Mainline discussions, that is out to consultation, and we're waiting to get a report. I think there are 3 consultations on there. And for us in the north of England and Transport for the North position, we very much do not want to lose that service that goes from east to west. We are reasonably well served north to south, both West Coast Mainline and East Coast Mainline, but it's that east-west connectivity that is really vitally important. So again, we have written to the department on that, and we are waiting now for the end of the consultations to see what other people think as well, but very much supporting that service remains in operation.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Chater, Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. We've got to give some serious thought. I mean, the point that was made is Manchester, a lot of people seem to see the entire north as its hinterland, all the way up to Newcastle and all the way down to the Midlands. The problem we've got changes being proposed. I hear rumours of services from Cleethorpes being revised and cut. We are concerned about whether the services from this entire side of the country are being adversely affected, because we've got to have the connection for business into Manchester. So the last thing we want is slow stopping trains. And this is the concerns that are being expressed by members of Parliament as well. My council leader is on Transport for the North, and he's had MPs bending his ear because they're very concerned to make sure that the entire sub-region, and in fact the entire East Coast area from the north in Scarborough down to the south bank of the Humber is adversely affected, and they don't want to see anything that's going to dilute the services and dilute the effectiveness of what's going to be done for our communities. And clearly we want reassurances that that's not going to have an adverse effect. I know it's not something you can necessarily do today, gentlemen, but my suggestion would be it would be very helpful for this to be brought up through main board and for it to be confirmed that we will be doing what we can. I know you can't control the train operating companies, but what others can do is to apply pressure to them. And I would ask that that be done if at all possible, because the last thing we want is adverse effects on any of the services, whether it's south or north of the Humber and all the way up to North Yorkshire, because clearly these services are vital to communities and also for tourism. When we think of the tourism book that goes into Cleethorpes, it's a big impact for that entire sub-region. So, it's where we can go with it. Thank you, Chairman.
No, I think Councillor Chowdhury, you're absolutely right. And there is something we can do about it, because like Northern Powerhouse Rail with the Rail North team, we are a co-client with the Department for Transport for the two train operating companies of both TPE and Northern. So in effect, we're 50-50 on there. And we are putting our views very clear and strongly across to the department how we feel this can be worked through. I mean, ultimately, we will have to get access to the track to do these upgrades to be able to open up the capacity and connectivity of the whole of the north of England. The railway is a system. It's not just sorting out Manchester or Liverpool or Hull. It's actually sorting all the network out, so you get that capacity in there and you're able to run these trains, and more of them and longer ones. But it's bringing that together in a holistic way where you're trying to minimise the effects on passengers and on freight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Salter, Matthew, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to say, I found the last few points for discussion very interesting. I guess I think all of us have been concerned about a kind of too Manchester-centric set of plans, although I do, as I understand it, there will really be wider benefits, and there is a desperate need to sort out some of the infrastructure around Manchester. So I'll be interested to see how that develops. But 2 points from the sort of monthly report that I thought were interesting. On page 20, there was a reference to stakeholder communications, and particularly I welcome the better communications on social media. I've seen on Facebook that there's much more being done now by Transport for the North to engage stakeholders, which I very much welcome. And there's sort of just really thanks for that and a plea for that to continue. I think Facebook is probably the best way of engaging people who are not normally sort of looking into the work of Transport for the North. The other thing that jumped out to me on page 18, there was a reference to the fact that we're now at sort of 50% of pre-COVID levels. There was the sort of statistics on the current usage. I say current usage in May rather. But I'm interested to know, and I mean, maybe we don't exactly have a clear answer on this, but at roughly what point do we think that will we be back at our sort of medium-term usage levels? What I mean by that is currently we've got about 50% of people have been vaccinated. We're largely getting to the point of reopening the economy, and we're currently at 50% of pre-COVID levels. Do we think that we're going to have bounced back to, say, 80-90% by the mid-autumn? Or, you know, what are the rough projections on this basis? Are we anticipating being back at 100% pre-COVID levels in a year's time? And I think that it's relevant because behaviour may have changed quite substantially due to just the psychological effects and what's happened over the last couple of years. So if we're working on the basis of, well, we'll definitely bounce back to 100% pre-COVID usage by a certain point, that may or may not be sensible. So look, maybe it's not easy to answer. I'm just interested, what are the thoughts on roughly how usage is bouncing back?
I'll give it a go if that's okay, because I think you're right. We're clearly in a fairly uniquely uncertain place. I'm not sure from the Rail North team, as are lots of other people, are tracking usage patterns on a weekly basis. I'm not sure there's been a bit of a tick up since we published a report at a month or so ago. I think generally the expectation is that we will return to something approaching previous levels of demand and capacity on the network. But as you noted, Councillor Salter, the pace at which that happens, there's quite a wide range of views out there. I'd say typically, again, Tim might have a view. I think typically there's a range of somewhere between 6 months to 2 years, but I think most people are more in. We are talking about a period of years rather than months to get back to where we were. And I think the key bit is the kind of confidence in safety and people's willingness to return to public transport in the way that we did. And I think the next, which is something that we're working with the operators and through Rail North with the department quite closely on, but that will be the test, I think, over the next 6 months of how willing are people to return to public transport. Tim, do you want to add anything?
I just think you're absolutely right there, Tim, and I think that extension has been up to sort of 3 years. But the one thing, of course, we have seen is that the vast majority of people are returning to their cars, and ultimately, once we're over this awful pandemic, we will get to the perennial problem of capacity on the rail network, whereby do we get a seat between Manchester and Leeds on these train services or not? When are we going to see increases in capacity of extra trains coming in through timetable change? But ultimately, in the north of England, we're still a Victorian railway, and we still only have twin track. Those fasts cannot overtake those slows. So you need programmes like NPR, the Manchester Recovery Task Force, Trans-Pennine Upgrade. And as we know, some of those programmes will take the next decade or two to complete the works, particularly for programmes like NPR. So the quicker we get the investment in programmes like Trans-Pennine Upgrade, we're just waiting to hear now about the next tranche of money to go into that programme, the quicker we can crack on and get this capacity up in the north of England so we can drive the economic benefits and get people out their fossil fuel burning vehicles because they know they're going to get seats. to know the train's going to leave and arrive on time, and they're going to get connectivity. Some very basic needs, but in the 21st century, they should be readily on tap.
Thank you very much, Tim and Matthew. Can I just endorse Matthew's point on Facebook? I think communication is key on all these different initiatives that we want to take, and at the end of the day, there will need to be some sort of political incentive there as well. I run several Facebook pages. One is my own councillor page, but I also run one, or my wife runs it, called Keeping the Gorgeous, and we have thousands of followers, and we'd be happy to help Transport for the North get on its way with its publicity, and I'm sure other councillors on this call would be the same. I've got two calls. I've got two people waiting to speak, and then I think we'll have to move on to the next topic. So the first one is Councillor Davison, and then after that it's Councillor Chater wishing to come back on something. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Paul. Well, first of all, just like to endorse what Councillor Chater said about the North and South Banks. I think obviously there's going to be a big focus on Manchester as a hub, but let's not forget that the North and South Banks are increasingly important industrial hubs. We've got a potential free port in Immingham. That's going to mean an awful increase in freight traffic, hopefully, taking those lorries off the road. And there's always an opportunity to piggyback good passenger services on the back of freight investments. So that's really just to support what Councillor Parry said. But my actual question really is about infrastructure. There's been a lot of talk about infrastructure improvements, and generally timetabling is a mixture potentially of capacity by installing permanent way crossovers, etc., to make stations more flexible. Obviously, line speed improvements are a big part of it, which involves again permanent way and potentially platform mods, bridge and structure mods to get the structure gauge up. But in my experience, having done a lot of that work in my career, installing big crossovers, etc., and around Manchester and the airport, the big blocker has been signalling. So the capacity is there to do the permanent way, but the signalling side of it has been terrible. Or I've been away now for 4 years, I have to say, from the industry, but certainly the last projects I did on the main line, they were always blocked by the basic lack of good signalling engineers and the capacity for Network Rail to deliver those schemes. And it set projects back a lot. So the question really is that in getting all these improvements through, is that still a problem, Tim? That's Tim Wood, really. I think, is that going to be a real blocker to us?
Look, I mean, Councillor Davidson, you and I have worked together in the past out on the railway line. Quite frankly, Manchester Piccadilly is looking down to get re-signalled in the 2030s, I understand. That'll be a massive programme, particularly if they, or the department, get instruction to carry on with these tranches of work that we're talking about in and around Manchester, because that also involves grade separation works, because of course at Slade Lane and places like that where you can get off the main line and down to the airport, they're flat junctions. So ultimately trains are having to wait until everything's passed before they can go over that flat junction and down towards the airport. Where we find ourselves, quite honestly, in the industry is we know in the next 15 years we'll have lost half the workforce, because we're all of a certain age that will be arriving at retirement age. And it's absolutely vital that these big employers and these big programmes of work start to tap into the youngsters at school age through the universities and get them into this great industry of ours, ready to take on some pretty major works up here in the north of England that have never been undertaken probably since the Industrial Revolution time, when the railway started up here. So that is a real big push for us. But I think the work needs to be really sequenced well. So we're very clear when tunnelling is finishing on HS2 in the first tranches, we are ready in NPR to get our tunnel boring machines going for the new lines that we are looking to build to open up that economy of ours. So that's where we find ourselves. Big push on resources. We've got time to sort it out now. we need to get on with it and make sure that those works are sequenced very clearly. We can keep the passengers still moving with the diversion routes. We have people there to be able to build these programmes of work, and ultimately we get the capacity in the north of England.
Okay. You skirted around the signalling question a bit there, Tim. I remember when I was doing Manchester Third Platform, there were reliance on engineers from India, signalling guys from India coming in. Quite tough to deal with, to be honest. The question really was, are they in a better position now? Because a lot of projects do get stalled. And yeah, there are big re-signalling projects, and they do tend to throw a lot of resource into those. But that's it has an effect on the smaller projects, which are equally important. Isolated crossovers, etc. So yeah, the real question is, are we going to be stuffed by that on some of the smaller jobs?
So I think that not for skirting around the question, but for waiting in abeyance for the work to be done down at the Moorgate line, and then of course coming up from King's Cross towards Peterborough, which is the ETCS level 2. So the European control system that we're looking to bring into the north of England through Transpan and Upgrade, and also Warrington right the way through up to Carlisle. But we want to see that working first of all, and those tests being conclusive. We'll have to wait until 23-24 for the commissioning for that period of time. Then ultimately, if that does work, to understand from Network Rail the rollout of new digital signalling versus why would we look to upgrade on the main line some of the existing signalling systems that we've got at the moment. So I think that's the abeyance bit. I'd like to see that successful trialling, and then of course rolling that out in the north of England, because digital railway is definitely the way to go rather than the systems we currently have at the moment.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Councillor Davison. We've got 2 questions left on this last topic. So I would ask both are quite brief as possible, and the answers succinct as I won't say kick-off is approaching, or I did say that. However, I do wish to make sure that you guys get away in a reasonable time in this meeting. So if I could just ask Sean to come in, please.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick, Chairman. There was a point that was made. If we're going to get people to get trains, we may need to have the discussions again about bringing back some of the lines that were discontinued many years ago. There's a lot of pressure from my colleagues in the East Riding about the Minsters line, the Beverley to York. There's also some measures with relation to the lines that were closed that link to the coast. I think this is something, if we're going to be trying to encourage modal shift, which we are, I think this is something that I'd have to ask the officers to try and raise these matters, particularly the line from Beverley to York, because that is a good alternative route for getting freight onto and to transport there. When we're decarbonising, it works in that way, and I'd ask the officers to pick it up at that stage and see what can be done from there. I don't necessarily expect a full response now, but we could pick that up in due course. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sean. Are you going to respond to Tim F?
I'd say thanks very much, and we will pick it up. We've picked up in our advice into the integrated rail plan, and clearly we are now waiting for that. But I think post IRP, it'll be much easier for TfN to get on and send out the short, medium, long-term interventions that are needed on the rail network.
I just think added to that, renewing your railway and the support we've given there for a number of lines, and particularly reopening the old Leamside line as well, which is really important to our North East partners and the SOBC work that's happening there at the moment.
Perfect. Councillor Parish, please.
Tim Foster's picked up on my proofreading success, and that's in the chat. But what Tim Wood just said, we did ask a while ago for a brief summary of all these schemes, rail and road, so that we know what we're talking about. And Tim did just mention Slade Lane, and I'd love to see what on earth you do at Slade Lane with a flyover that would get anywhere near a sound business case. So it'd be useful to have a little summary of all these different schemes at some stage.
Thank you, Councillor Parish. Are you okay with that, Tim? Tim and Tim?
we're okay with that. I mean, I think it's a very wide range of upgrades because, of course, particularly in Lancashire, there are schemes there that we're looking at. The old Skelmersdale line, bringing that back in, Fleetwood coming back into Preston as well. They're all at different stages. I think the one overarching thing we've got to remember is there is a ceiling of money, and the first big call on that is running the railways steady state. The next big call on that is HS2. And bringing that up from the south of England up to Manchester as the western leg. And of course, are still calling absolutely for the eastern leg to be built. NPR and TRU. Once we hit the ceiling of whatever the envelope is, what happens, of course, is the work goes back until we get to a point where there is enough money in each of those years to be able to build those schemes out. That probably is my main concern about these schemes coming on board. Have we got the people and the money that's available from government?
Thank you very much, Tim and Tim. Could I just close and summarise this area now? Thank you. It seems to me it's very powerful and very worthwhile debate. So thank you for all the contributors. And the responders as best you could. I think I'm reassured that you are on the case, even though we are here just pointing out the odd thing. But that's great. It strikes me that on the whole, we really need to be going faster. We need to be sequenced. There's potential for skill shortages, etc. If we wish to achieve economic green growth and decarbonisation, then really there needs to be the will to go faster. We've got, and it looks like we are getting the plans together, but it's then getting the practicalities and getting things moving on the ground. So I'd like to thank everybody for that very fruitful debate. Thank you. The next point on the agenda is the review of the scrutiny function. This will divide into, I think, 3 sections. So the first section will be introduced by Debbie Dimmock. The second section is about meetings, whether they're face to face or not, and the third will be about perhaps the Scrutiny Committee actually requesting the officers to carry out a piece of work for us. So over to you, Deborah, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As I previously reported to the committee at your last meeting, a review of the scrutiny function was identified in Transport for the North's annual governance statement, action plan for 2021. And this report is to start that process. As members will be aware, when Transport for the North was first established, at the meeting of the Shadow Board before the first meeting of the board, the board members unanimously agreed that we should adopt a principle of scrutiny first, meaning that proposals would be considered by the Scrutiny Committee before they were decided by the board. And the reason for this was that the regulations which established Transport for the North required a Scrutiny Committee, but did not require or give that scrutiny power for call-in. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons behind that decision, was that Transport for the North is mainly a strategic body, and the strategies that Transport for the North adopts are subject to statutory consultation before a final adoption, which means that any decision to adopt a strategy, the strategy would have been out to full public consultation. Therefore, it was considered it wouldn't be appropriate for a scrutiny committee to be able to call in a decision that was based on a full public consultation. And therefore, we didn't ask for a call-in provision for scrutiny. So this is the way in which scrutiny has a meaningful role within TFN by being able to scrutinise all the decisions that go to the board before they're made, make recommendations on those, which are then taken into account. But the purpose of the review is really to look at how well that principle is operating and whether members are happy with that, the operation of the principle, whether there are some items that they feel don't need to be the subject of scrutiny first, or whether they wish us to continue the practice that we have had up to now, which is that anything that is going for a formal decision at the board is reported to scrutiny first, provided, of course, that it's not an urgent item that is time limited, which doesn't allow for scrutiny first. So in order to sort of kick off the review, we did send out a consultation document. This was sent to all members of the Scrutiny Committee and also to members of the board with a series of questions. Unfortunately, it was timed at the same time as the elections, and therefore we only had 10 responses in total. I mean, those responses were informative in that they identified that most members were satisfied and happy with the scrutiny first principle, and that they wished it to continue as at the present time, with all items coming to scrutiny before they are considered by the board where possible. Questions were asked about whether there was an interest in scrutiny working in small groups, but there was less support for scrutiny panels. There was some support for scrutiny having its own work programme, and in the past members have called for specific reports, and obviously that is a option that will continue into the future. And I would also remind members that they do have the option to invite external independent experts to speak, or any other person to speak at their meetings. And it's also a forum at which members of the public are allowed to speak, subject to the agreement of the chair. And of course, this isn't the case. Members of the public are not allowed to speak and address the board except in special circumstances. And so this is the main forum in which members of the public would be entitled to speak. And of course, you have had representatives of environmental groups speaking to you in the past. Because there were not that many responses to the consultation exercise, we're proposing to run it again with the agreement of members. It had been suggested that a small panel be set up to take the review forward, but again, the request for nominations was sent out at the same time as the mayor elections, and no nominations for membership of a working group have been received. So really the report is to ask members of the committee how they wish to take the review forward. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Deborah. So I think the first thing, really, this is really all about our process, to have a look at what we think of this scrutiny process, and in particular the scrutiny first view. The first thing I think I'd like to ask the group is, would you be happy that all the questionnaires and consultation papers were sent out again, and that we could have an attempt, a better attempt, because I believe we could have had up to 50 responses and only get 10 is disappointing and could lead to more eccentric results. So I would ask, first of all, can I have agreement that we can send these questionnaires out again? Perhaps we could do it by objection rather than anything else.
Chair, could I comment?
Yes, sure. I did ask you in the just give me 2 seconds, Councillor Jones. I just want to just do the next thing, and then you can come in by all means. So I'm getting yeses on that. So Deborah, please send those out. The second question is, there doesn't seem to be much enthusiasm for setting a separate panel of 3 people up to investigate this now. So my view is that maybe it becomes a standing item on the next 2 meetings or 3 meetings, because I think we have to report back on this at Easter, so probably the next 2 meetings. So it could be done on the main agenda, or it could be done within a panel. So that's the question. But before we get before I ask for all the answers, or thumbs up or thumbs down or whatever, then could I go to Councillor Jones and allow him to raise his points? I've also picked up Councillor Chapter and Councillor Salter as well, which I will pick up on straight after Councillor Jones. Councillor Jones, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I should say at the outset, I'm not a great lover of the scrutiny process in local government, but notwithstanding that, my view is that the Chair and the members of this committee do the process perfectly adequately. You know, unless you're going to have lots of resources and lots of committees and subcommittees and, you know, panels or whatever, my answer is I think the scrutiny process is okay. And if I think it's okay, I just don't think we should ask officers who've got lots of work to do to spend lots of time on reviewing something if we think it's okay. Now, if members of this panel don't think it's okay, well, fine, say so, and then we'll have to have a look at it. But I'm perfectly happy with the scrutiny process as it exists now. But I'm not saying for a minute that you can't change things. And if you want a select group of members, half a dozen, to look at a particular item and so on, that's fine with me. But I'm perfectly happy with the scrutiny process as it is now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. If I go to Councillor Chapter, I think was next, but then
it was. Thank you, Chair. And as Chair of Overview and Scrutiny at my council, I may slightly disagree with our dear friend Councillor Jones, but I don't think this process works badly. I think that there would be potentially capacity for us to look at if there was urgency, a genuine urgency, that the Chair considered required a subcommittee to be set up. The Chair should be in a position to do that, and that's something I think would be a good way forward. Because the old line, events steer by events. Things do happen, and sometimes they have to happen quickly. If there was a very, very serious problem in the area, we may need to review something because something may become urgent. Otherwise, I think that the suggestion you make, Chair, of us reviewing this on the agenda for the next 2 meetings is infinitely sensible. Because the problem is, people around that normally would be around this table and that are around the screens that we're talking about have got other things that they have to do. They are not just Transport for the North. I'm chairman of the Humber Bridge Board. I'm on various other bodies in the local area. I'm also on various committees at my council, including planning and licensing. And if we weren't doing this meeting online, I wouldn't be able to do a planning meeting today. But it's a case of, I think what you're doing at the moment with the suggestions is eminently sensible. I think go back out with the questionnaires, let's pick it up on the agenda at the next 2 meetings, and then we at least have got an idea where we're going. If we find that we need to change it after the next meeting and look at another alternative, I'm sure you'll suggest that, Chairman. But I'm quite comfortable with where we're going at this moment in time.
Thank you, Sean. Matthew, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. If the direction of travel is towards reviewing scrutiny in the next couple of meetings, my question may be irrelevant. But I was going to ask whether the intention was that the working group, if it was set up, would be meeting online or in person, and I think that would be relevant to whether people would want to sign up for it. Personally, my preference probably would be for an actual working group, but if most councillors feel that they'd rather just review this as an issue on the agenda in the next couple of meetings, then so be it.
Okay, thank you very much. There was one other hand up, but it seems to have disappeared. Is there anybody else wishing to make a comment? I can see you, John. Would you like to come back in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm in agreement really that the process I think is working fine. And we've got to remember we're here to scrutinise decisions and potential decisions by the main board. but we are not the main board. We're not here to actually formulate policy. That's the business of the main board and the officers who actually produce all the reports and do the work. So I think as a scrutiny committee, let's not lose sight that's what we're doing. We're scrutinising. We're not formulating policy. We're helping it along, but we're not formulating it. So I think the process is working fine. I agree with the Councillor Chater again. We've all got, I certainly got a busy diary with cabinet duties as well as other stuff that I do. And it would be tough for me to attend further committees. So I think unless it's absolutely necessary, and I can't envisage really why we should have to form subcommittees, to be quite honest with you, but as you say, sometimes things happen. Shit happens. But anyway, just to say that I support the current process, really. That's my main comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm watching out for other hands, but in the meantime, if I've got this right, just for information, any subcommittee I would be able to operate online. That can happen within our constitution, so that wouldn't mean that we would have meetings. But it looks to me like the consensus is that we would like this to be a standing item on the agenda for the next two meetings, and then the final report back can go back. So I'm not seeing anybody objecting to that. I think the fact that we've all got a lot of meetings and various plates spinning, that actually the amount of travel associated with this particular group actually does take a lot of our time out. So that's where I would like to go with this. So Deborah, what else do you need from us in order for us to have completed what is required on your paper?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, that is satisfactory for today. We know where we're going. We're going to send out the questionnaire again and have it as a standing item on the next two meetings. The other item that you've raised is meetings. Under the Constitution, there's a requirement for the Scrutiny Committee to meet once a year, and that will be an annual meeting for formal business.
You mean a face-to-face meeting?
Other than that would be a face-to-face meeting in the building in public. But apart from that, it's open to the committee to meet as a consultation call in the same way as this meeting, as it chooses, because it makes recommendations which the Chief Executive can then take forward to the board.
Okay, thank you very much, Deborah. So, Matthew, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just say, if the suggestion is that we should meet for our normal scrutiny committee meetings going forward, that they should almost all be online, I would strongly oppose that. I appreciate how inconvenient it is for everyone to have such long travelling, but I really feel there is a lot of value in face-to-face meetings, in the conversations that we have with officers and other councillors before the meeting, and whatever. And I think, we ought to be prepared to commit to, say this is sufficiently important that, okay, even if it's blocking out most of a day, which it really is, that we ought to be meeting face to face once it's safe to do so again. So, I mean, that would be my very, very strong preference.
Okay, well, look, we're going to come to a conversation. So now let me make a proposal to you all. So the next meeting will be our AGM. It's due early September 8th, I think, or 7th, off the top of my head. The point, and my proposal is that the next meeting is a face-to-face meeting, and it would be held in Manchester Town Hall, where there's plenty of space so that we can actually, and before that meeting occurs, we will ask everybody on the committee, etc., and the officers how they would want that room spaced. This is a big room to make sure that people, if they need the equivalent of an iron board between them or the 2 meter rule, then we can administer that, and we can make a decision as to whether we wear masks or not in that meeting in between talking. So at the moment, the proposal is that the next meeting would be at Manchester Town Hall, and that would be an opportunity to meet. And then, obviously, subject to any discussions that we might have at the next meeting, but the proposal for the following 3 meetings would be that they are online unless there was a compelling reason to have meetings face to face. And my argument would be that the online meetings mean that we get much better attendance, a much better quality of debate, amongst other things. So that will be my proposal, but I can see that Matthew already would want to counter. So you needn't speak, Matthew, other than we've all picked up your piece. But Matthew would like us all to go back to face-to-face meetings subject to rule of law. So that's the other side of it. So I would welcome other people's comments. So I can see Councillor Fenton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to express support for the proposal you set out in terms of having the next meeting face-to-face, then continuing to meet in a in a virtual way, unless there's a compelling reason to do otherwise. I think the past year has shown the benefits and the ease with which we can have constructive and informative discussions where officers can be brought in and out, and their time is as precious as, if not more so, than councillors' time. And it's worked very well, and I think it's a model that we should embrace. And if we want to walk the walk in terms of decarbonisation, then not travelling from one end of the region to the other for a 2-hour meeting in which, unless there's an issue you feel strongly about, you don't actually say anything, I think would be not best use of our time. So I'm very happy to support your proposal.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fenton. I'll let you speak last, Matthew, so that you've heard everybody else, just in case nobody else is on your side. But Councillor Davison might be on your side.
Partially on your side, Matthew. I think we are well used now to Teams. I think that means that the debate and the attendance has improved, in my opinion, just going by the council meetings, the cabinet meetings that we've had. But I also agree that it's very sterile, I think, and it does lack some of the human elements. It lacks the networking elements and the ability to have a cup of tea and a chat before and after. And I certainly miss some of that. I think what we're proposing, certainly in our council, is a blended approach. So there certainly is an argument that perhaps at least 50% should be online, and maybe more. You can have that debate about what the right balance is. Once a year, I think, is not acceptable to me. But whether it's every other meeting face-to-face or every second meeting face-to-face, I think there's an argument for that and a benefit for that, So, yeah, partially supported. I think there is an argument for blended, though, going forward, even when all the restrictions have disappeared and perhaps hopefully COVID has vanished into being either gone away or something we have to live with a jab at winter time. I do think that there's an argument for blended. So,
all right, thank you. Councillor O'Hara, please.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Matthew and both the speakers really, that you need to have an ad hoc approach to it. But I think meetings in person are much better than online. I mean, it's okay for people who are really good with IT and that, but I found the council meeting, sometimes the chair doesn't actually spot the hand going up. So it's much easier in a room, and perhaps 50% would be a good compromise.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak before I let Matthew back at us to make us all travel across the world? If not, then just before Matthew speaks, my honest view is, the first thing is that I would want to stick with the principle of either having meetings in Leeds or Manchester or online, because I think any other venues are far too difficult for certain members to get to. And I know that, so I mentioned the M word there, so I know Manchester centricity is a challenge. And I've offered Harrogate Conference Centre, but it might not be so easy for many of you to get there, except for those of you with helicopters. But there is a challenge in the amount of time that's spent compared to the time we meet, and maybe there are alternatives. So, for example, we could all, perhaps when the meeting, half an hour before the meeting starts or half an hour after the meeting finishes, we could actually get a cup of coffee, and mine seems to be going in and out of focus, and we actually could just have a general online chat, and we could invite the officers, and we could perhaps be a little bit more innovative. I do get David's point about wanting to be face-to-face, and that not everybody is an ICT specialist. And there's lots of merit, and but the one thing I do not want to lose is the quality of debate and the thing and some of the things that some of our real people with real deep knowledge of these industries have brought to the table. So I'm very happy that that eventually we get to a blended stage, but at the moment we are still teetering through this pandemic. However, notwithstanding all that, I think the next meeting, I'm proposing is face-to-face anyway. So, Councillor Davison, and then you, Councillor Salter.
Just quickly, we're going to put the questionnaire out again, Deborah. I can't remember. I did complete it, I think. I'm one of the 10, I think, that did complete it. So, I think, can't this question be added? I don't recall that this particular issue was on the questionnaire. I may be wrong, because it's a while ago.
You're correct. It wasn't on the question. No.
I think it's important enough. There's a big enough variety of views about the right way to proceed now, given that I think inevitably COVID has changed the approach that many businesses are making towards physical meetings and working from home, working from offices. It's difficult to see quite whether we're ever going to go back to what we considered the norm before COVID. I think many firms will adopt a blended approach. So I think we're going to get quite a lot of different views on that, and we do need to put it out there, I think, to all members, don't we?
Yes, certainly we can add questions.
Thank you very much, Deborah.
Yeah.
Well, go on, Matthew. Convince us all that we should all be coming. We should all be coming to the northwest.
Right. Well, I won't drone on for too long. Just a few quick points. I think there's a lot of sense to the kind of blended approach that was suggested, and some meetings face to face and some online, and you can rejig the agendas accordingly. And you may have meetings where we have a lot on the agenda, might be easier face to face, and there might be lighter agendas that can be done more easily online. There's another way in which you can do things half and half, which is to have hybrid meetings, where those of us who can meet face to face, but say if a councillor has a really important meeting on the same day, they might want to dial in online, and that's certainly something that we could trial, and that might work perfectly well. The other point I would make is talking about walking the walk on decarbonisation is of course a sensible point, although equally I would point out that we really ought to be making use of the train network that we are debating and looking for improvements on, and for myself, I agree, by the way, that, okay, let's meet in central locations. But for myself, it was very interesting when I had to book a journey across to York and use the trains to go to York, which I hadn't done before. And, in a funny way, you do get to see some of the problems with the network as well, and that can inform the discussions that we have. So I don't think, it makes sense to say, well, we shouldn't be using the trains at all because, bad CO2, etc., whatever. And look, we'll have to see how it goes, but I certainly think that we would lose an awful lot if we went to online only meetings. So we ought to at least try, blended approach, hybrid meetings, and see how that works.
Okay, well, unless anybody else has got any points, I think we should leave that to Deborah's questionnaire. Maybe with this question on there, it'll be a hot topic and we'll get 50 answers back on this. But my proposal at the moment, subject to any legal change and subject to us getting the venue, which I believe is open, despite that what's been put in the, we checked it this morning, but the venue would probably be Manchester Town Hall, where we've got plenty, to make sure there's plenty of space, because we don't know, although the rules in theory are changing, we haven't got confirmation yet. So that would be, that's the proposal. Is that okay if I move on to the next item? Is there anyone? Okay, look, thank you very much. Again, another worthwhile debate. The last item we want to cover under this is, I'm imagining that some of you may have seen this and some may not, but the government recently put forward, and I may have got it's got lots of B's in it, Bus Back Better discussion paper, and which all councils had to respond to that were responsible for transport. And I really would I would be proposing that we actually request the officers to look into this Bus Back Better paper and just review how that impacts on the work that we've done, because people have mentioned previously about work being lost from the past, which is perfectly valid work, and I don't believe that the work that we've done on bus fares and train fares, etc., should be lost. And so maybe there is a piece of work around this Bus Back Better. Just briefly, this paper asked local governments to respond either you weren't interested in in the proposal was one, i.e. you didn't want to do anything. The second was that you would look at enhanced relationships with transport, and the third one was that you are moving towards a franchise model for the bus services in your area. Moving from this do nothing to the middle one did not preclude you from moving to the third one at some point in time. So as I say, my proposal is that we ask officers to do a small paper on this, on how TfN should be responding to the Bus Back Better and how it impacts on the work that we have done. I would like to open it up to any debate that people might have on that, whether they think I'm nuts to ask for this or whether you feel it's a valid question. Councillor Parish.
Seems fair enough, Chair. I mean, I'd missed it entirely until my son sent me a query from one of his mates saying what consultation has been about how Warrington is going to respond to this. And that was about 2 days before the deadline for saying which model you wanted to do. And I said, I don't think there's been any consultation, because 6 weeks to decide on something like this is, it's crazy, really. But so, yeah, what you're suggesting, I think, get a bit of response from the officers if they would. And because it's part of all the whole what's going to happen with the buses, and Andy Burnham's already well on the way with franchising in Manchester. So yeah, to get how all the individual local transport authorities in the north respond to that, whether everybody got it in by the 30th of June, I'm not sure. That would be the first question, I think.
Anybody else got any contribution on this one at all? For or against? I think there's just to add a little. Oh, Councillor Davison.
Yeah, I'll just be cautious, Paul, because it's very, very different, urban to rural. Issues on buses are utterly different. Obviously, and also the rules and regulations about it in terms of in North Links we've got two, they're both private operators, Stagecoach and a local company called Hornsby's who operate the buses. We give them a very large subsidy to run a double-decker bus with one person sitting on it. We have a problem. We're trying to introduce a call and go service, but that's been rather difficult because of COVID. You can't get people on them, but very, very different, I suspect, to what issues you'll have in Manchester or any of the big towns. So I'm not quite sure how our officers here would weave their way through that and come up with some policy that would satisfy both the rural spreads and the cities. That's my only observation. I mean, in principle, it's not a bad idea, but I'm not quite sure what we'll take away from it.
Okay, I'm going to bring Tim Foster in a second, but my one of the takeaways, one of my big concerns is the weight of work that's already been done by the team here, and even if it just results in them saying we should share this work, should share the work, particularly over the I'll call it the Oyster card issue for buses and for trains, etc., then I just don't want the work to be lost, and there's been an awful lot of work done. Or for that matter, how it's all going to be coordinated across the north of England, I should say. Tim, please come back. I saw you flag somewhere.
Yeah, I put my hand up briefly and then
then you ran away.
Then thought I ran away. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting area and where TFN potentially can add some value. It's as members will doubtless know, buses are not within our remit. But I think that there are a number of areas now where bus policy and the approach that different parts of the north want to take locally do interact quite closely. Not only, particularly, I think, with our plans for rail. We're starting to do some work looking at multimodal hubs and interchanges between different modes of travel. We've done a piece of work on active travel. We are as you hopefully know, we are midway through a major piece of research on transport-related social exclusion, and we're just about to embark on a project on the relationship between health and well-being. So I would feel fairly comfortable if the committee asked us to look at something that we could pull together, something not that we're not talking about a bus strategy for the north, but something which at least pulled all those issues together, emphasize, potentially set out a range of areas where the north might want to do things collectively to the committee in the first instance, rather than go straight to the board. I think that's something we could do. Relatively. Right, it's a relatively straightforward piece of work.
Thank you, Tim. And it also would fit in with something that's later on our agenda, which is the decarbonisation strategy as well. So thank you for that. So are we okay to ask for this? Is there anybody objecting to this at all on this committee at all? You could raise your hand now if you've got an objection. Otherwise, I shall move on to rail reform matters. Okay, there's no objection, so if that could be minuted, and if you take that away, Tim, that's Tim F as opposed to Tim W, that will be perfect. Thank you. So now I'd like to
thank you.
Move to the rail reform matters, and this is David. So David, over to you. Thank you.
Right. Hello. First time I've spoken to you all. So given we're overrunning a bit, I'll try and briefly summarise what's in this paper. Hopefully you've seen lots of the discussion a bit in the press and so on as well. So the main proposals of the white paper, obviously forming a new body, Great British Railways, which will be all of Network Rail's functions, plus bits of the rail delivery group and the Department for Transport, and it'll have more power over the railway industry than Network Rail does at the moment, because it'll have more responsibility for timetabling and fares. Now, what the white paper really doesn't describe at all is the relationship between this body and local authorities, subnational transport bodies and so on. The only hint is it suggests that Great British Railways might not have complete control over timetabling and fares, and subsequent discussions with DFT, I'm told, have suggested that the government does envisage that city regions will have a role in the future shape of the industry. So I think that's where Great British Railways not having complete control of timetabling and fares comes in. Other major changes suggesting is simplification of the fare structure. Apparently at the moment there's about 2,500 stations, so that means there's 6 million possible origins and destination combinations, but there's 55 million different ticket prices in the system, so that's about 9 for every possible journey you can make. So they want to simplify that in the long term, but in the short term they've actually made it more complicated by introducing flexi seasons, which has already been done, so 2 and 3 day per week season tickets. And then the third major thing is the replacement of the franchise system by passenger service contracts similar to what Transport for London are operating, though there's an indication in the paper that operators would have some sort of commercial freedom later on, especially the long distance ones. So all the work that people like LNER have done on building up marketing databases of who their customers are wouldn't be lost. So in terms of how we respond to it, we think that there's an opportunity for Transport for the North to stress the positive role we've had with past examples of how we've coordinated the industry in the North, such as following the May 2018 timetable problems, coordinating a response to that, and also last year with coordinating our response to in the early days of the pandemic and having regular meetings with the top. That shows that we sort of have a practical role in the railway industry, but then also intellectually through the analytical framework, all the work that the modelling and economics team has done, and the strategy department in general. I think you've probably seen that we've won a major transport planning award for 2 years in a row now for our strategic transport plan and the future travel scenarios. So we want to stress that we've got the democratic legitimacy and the intellectual depth to play a major role in the railway industry in the North, and particularly support transformational growth, which is what our analytical tools are intended to do by modelling things like land use and transport interaction. So these are the reasons why TFN feel we should have a big role in the railway industry in future. Our particular concerns are that the proposal is to retain the existing Network Rail regions, so we would still have to deal with an eastern region and a northwest and central, which it makes it a bit difficult at the moment. We tend to think that they prioritise north-south connections, the radial routes out of London, after High Speed 2 is implemented. If that's run as like a separate part, a separate division of the railway network, there wouldn't be the need for these radial routes out of London anymore. So we would perhaps try to push for a pan-northern route to give us just one team to deal with in Great British Railways. And the other major concerns we have is that Great British Railways also have to have a 30-year strategic plan and a decarbonisation plan, and we would want to make sure that they're aligned with our vision. So we've already done some work with local authority partners and solicited their views on what needs doing, and we've developed a memorandum of understanding which Network Rail have agreed to, explaining what sort of strategic planning they do, what sort of strategic planning we do, try to make sure we're not duplicating work and so on. And what we want to do is build on that work, get a consultancy commission to describe our own vision of how subnational transport bodies, city regions, combined and unitary authorities, county councils and so on will interact with Great British Railways in future, and maybe tie that in with what we're expecting in terms of major infrastructure programmes. So another thing which is going to be waiting input from the IRP, I think, to give us a view of how rail devolution might happen over the next couple of decades. And our intention at the moment is to get a draft of that by mid-August so that it can come back to you before going to full board in September. And obviously that would be very demanding if it wasn't for the fact that we'd already done a lot of work with partners and with Network Rail to have a baseline for that. I think that's pretty much summarises what's in the paper.
Thank you very much, David. A very comprehensive review there, and I note there are 3 things that you want for us. One of the things I'm hoping is that you were here when we discussed item 4, the monthly operating report. There was a number of, although not necessarily strategic in their content themselves, but indicated a strategic issue over perhaps how we deal with lines that are no longer operating, or some lines that can actually give us very quick wins and benefits. So I hope you picked up on that. As a committee, we are asked to note the white paper, which you've broken down for us very nicely, so appreciate that. That you, on behalf of Transport for the North, are seeking more clarity over the necessary relationships, and it's great that you've got the memo of understanding sorted out, as well as working with the local authorities. So that's fantastic news. And I think the third area where you probably want some input from us, and I already got at least 2 hands up, maybe 3, is there any other additional comments that we can, I won't say help you, because we're probably just going to give you a shopping list, which you've probably got a long enough one as it is, but maybe there'll be some stuff, maybe we can put some stuff and contribute some things that maybe you hadn't already thought of. So I'm going to start with Councillor Parish. So over to you, Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chair. There were just a couple of queries. One, it's a historic thing because it's 100 years ago since the grouping, and we ended up with the London North Eastern Railway and the London Midland and Scottish. So you can see where the legacy is from that. I did try and look this morning. You think everything's on the internet, but trying to find out, for instance, how many passenger journeys from Leeds go to London and how many go to other places, it's not quite that easy. And I'm just trying to imagine, because most of them are shorter journeys, most of the journeys in the north will be within the north, it strikes me. But I'm guessing at that, so it would be good to have some statistics about that. The other query was it was just a sideline in the thing, because they were making some play of this business that it would be less confusing for passengers getting compensation to have this structure. But I can't quite see that really, because last time we had a live meeting, my train was late back after a fatality on the line back to Warrington, so I got all my fare back, but I knew what I was doing. I had to apply to the train operating company that I was travelling on. And then, and that's what you do. But then they sort it out in the background with a legion of lawyers to decide whose fault it is. And as I understand it, all this would do is you'd still complain to one body and there'd still be a legion of lawyers behind it, divvying out whose fault it was between Great British Railways and the different operating companies. So I couldn't quite see what the advantage would be there. You still have the legion of lawyers, which is what costs so much.
So David, just before you answer this, can I just bring in the two other speakers, and then maybe you can take all 3?
Okay.
Thanks. Councillor O'Hara, please.
Yeah, it all looks very well, but my worry is coordination, which has been the problem ever since British Rail was privatised in the first place. You've got passengers who can't quite work out what train's going to turn up and when. I saw in the paper that there's certain lines where they're actually running slower than they were in the Victorian times. And it's already been raised that a lot of this is down to what money the government provide for Transport for the North or Northern Power to actually be able to do the work that's required. And a lot of these sidelines that they're saying they're going to reopen, you wonder whether they are, because they're doing surveys at the minute, and it's great, but unless everything's coordinated and they get the fares at a reasonable rate, it's not going to really change things that much. And when I look at it, it just worries me a little bit that there's nothing about coordination and getting the prices right to get more people travelling on the trains that have limited incomes.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Hara. And I think we just got Councillor Jones, and then it's over to you, David. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, Chair, I just wanted to mention that I'm sure you know this, but in Greater Manchester, we already have control of the tram network because it's publicly owned. We're intending to take control of the bus network through franchising once the legal issues have been sorted out. And that leads rail. And I think we've all heard Andy Burnham on more than one occasion say there must be a role for regions of this country to be running their local rail services. So I think through TfN, that's what we should be pressing for, that once we've got an agreement on the new, Great British Railway Organisation or words to that effect, then we should be asking for TfN, to have a real role in the north of England so that we can be running our local rail services without, if you like, them being run from London kind of thing. So I think we ought to at least press that issue as best we can.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. David, over to you. I think there's overwhelming support for what you're doing here, but over to you.
Yes, I think the main focus of the white paper is really the public's perception of accountability in the railway industry, that because there are so many different bodies at the moment, people who aren't specialists in the area really don't know who's responsible for what. So people go onto Network Rail's website looking for timetables. I mean, when I worked for Network Rail, we even had people turning up at the offices asking for tickets and so on. And they don't like the idea that body that owns the infrastructure doesn't really have any responsibility for timetabling and fares. So I think that's very much the reason why they're wanting to create this single body, Great British Railways, so that you have the accountability in terms of public perception. But the white paper does leave the details of how things will be done in future up for grabs, really. So there's no particular explanation of the process of getting projects done and things being implemented directly, how that will change. Just that because Great British Railways will be the single focus of accountability, we might be able to hold them to account for things like excessive costs and things more clearly than we can with Network Rail at the moment. So it is an opportunity to address some of these issues, but there's a lot of hard work, I think, yet to be done in the details. Answering the points about London. Yes, there is a focus on London, because I think you'll find, I mean, the problem with the actual numbers of passengers travelling to destinations from each origin, that information is commercially confidential, so it's a bit difficult to get your hands on it. So you can get the total number of passengers at each station, but how many are going to London as opposed to local stations is secret information at the moment. What I can tell you is that any station where there's a direct service to London, then London is one of the top destinations, and very importantly, because the ticket prices are so expensive, it's one of the main sources of revenue. So that's why London gets priority. I mean, interestingly, some places which don't have direct services to London, like Middlesbrough, London wouldn't even be in the top 10 destinations that people travel to from there. So it does show the importance of direct services, and how actually if we have more direct services across the north through Northern Powerhouse Rail, it'll actually shift the balance away from an industry very much focused on travelling to London north-south and develop the east-west connections that we're interested in. So I think I've answered that. I hope I've answered the points there, and I think why in particular some of the issues haven't been given much detail yet, but it's our opportunity to actually influence the direction of travel.
Thank you very much, David. We look forward to your next paper, and no doubt people will have plenty of time to think between then and now as well as to how this might work. I did love your ticket permutation statistics, so well done on working that out. I'll be using it as a party when I go to soon. So thank you very much. I'd now like to move to Peter Coles and the decarbonisation strategy. Thank you. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just going to share some slides with you. So do let me know when you receive those.
They're up.
Great. Yes, today I'm going to provide an update on the decarbonisation strategy consultation. That consultation started on the 7th of June and it's currently running. I'm going to do this with my colleague Stephen Smith from TFN's engagement team, and he'll be giving some ideas to sort of the figures and the things that we've been doing so far. But firstly, just a very quick update on the strategy, just as a bit of a aide-memoire. The strategy, if you remember, it included for a trajectory which culminates in a close to zero date by 2045, and that's a trajectory that is more ambitious than the current CCC 6 carbon budget trajectory, and hence more ambitious than current UK policy. It includes a 55% reduction by 2030, a 95% reduction by 2040, and those averages, those interim milestones effectively represent averages to be achieved by the region. And we know that some of our places are planning to move quicker and that some may out of necessity move slower. But to reach close to zero by 2045 as a region, all of our places need to be there or thereabouts. And beyond providing us with an ambition or a target upon which to carry out a policy analysis, allowing us to make recommendations to national government and provide guidance to local partners, the trajectory also provides a benchmark against which we can assess the carbon performance of our investment programmes and the individual schemes falling out of it. So having developed that trajectory, i.e. where we need to be, we've also needed to understand where we are now and where we may be in the future in terms of carbon emissions from surface transport without the interventions proposed within the strategy. So the coloured lines on the graph show those 4 future baseline emission trajectories, and we've modelled these by using our analytical framework to understand our current emissions and combine that with our 4 future travel scenarios, which I'll remind you of in the next slide, but they effectively represent 4 plausible ways we may be living and travelling in the future. So the coloured lines represent a number of different scenarios of where we think we'll be without interventions, and the dotted line represents where we need to get to. And the gap between them is called the policy gap, which in reality is the emissions gap. And then we've carried out a policy analysis to understand the level of policy commitment that is needed across a range of levers to bridge that gap, and also the sort of measures that are needed at both a national and local level to actually deliver on that commitment. So very quickly, the 4 travel scenarios I mentioned, they represent those 4 plausible futures, recognising that the drivers of travel demand in the future are uncertain, and it's going to be determined by the way we live and the where we live and the way we work. And in order to address that uncertainty, we've developed 4 scenarios. The scenario which we've named Just About Managing represents our business as usual with a continuation of existing trends, whilst prioritised places sees a shift of focus towards quality of life decisions and away slightly from economic growth, with people choosing to live in smaller towns and rural areas. And our 3rd scenario, digitally distributed, sees people being less tied to where they work, with increased digital remote working and dispersed employment. But of course, whilst people are commuting less often, the trips that they do take are often longer as a consequence of where they now live and where they now work. So digitally distributed sees car ownership remain higher a poor emissions performance in the short term, but a much better one in the longer term, as it's got a high propensity to embrace new innovations such as zero emission vehicles and shared transport modes and autonomous vehicles, etc. And finally, with urban zero carbon, we see the growth focused in cities, which allows us a relatively quicker change in emissions through the increased use of public transport, and particularly active travel options and the localisation of travel generally. So I'm going to hand over now to Stephen, who will talk us through what we're doing on the consultation and where we've got to on that.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Peter. So I think a quick summary through this slide. So I think obviously we've developed the decarbonisation strategy for which we're required to go out for public consultation. So that's been developed by the strategy team, and we've brought on independent consultants such as Traversa. They will be collating all the responses independently and pulling those together in a report that will be sent through once the consultation closes. So in the stakeholder engagement and communication team, we're supporting with the delivery and promotion of the consultation through a number of different channels, which I'll cover on the next slide. But in a nutshell, the consultation launched on the 7th of June, and it's going to be running for 12 weeks, closing at 12 p.m. on the 31st of August, so the day after the bank holiday. So, Peter, do you want to jump onto the next slide? Okay, yeah, so I think in terms of the summary of activity, so we've got a dedicated consultation website where people can provide the feedback, but the landing page is actually Transport for the North's website, so that's where people will download the strategy, etc. But in terms of the responses, they're going to be directed to a dedicated online platform, so that can be found, like I said, if you go to Transport for the North /decarbonisation, there's a link through to it there and to the strategy. So we're doing 3 regional consultation events to support it. So we're doing one for the North West, North East and Yorkshire and the Humber. We just did the North East one yesterday. We've got the North West and Yorkshire and the Humber coming up next week. These have been hosted by Zoom. So essentially it's a Zoom webinar where we enable a Q&A function. So there'll be a short presentation from Peter and Jack in the team. And then there's a Q&A where people can ask questions, and the one yesterday was quite good feedback, lots of questions to challenge Peter, I think is a fair way to put it. So I think, like I say, we look forward to the ones next week. In terms of the wider promotional activity, so we've done a Transport for the North, a TFN Talks webinar, that we've done a series of these since last year. So we did one of those to help promote it. We did a podcast recording with Peter, and there was also a Transport Across the North APPG session along with a couple of dedicated round tables. So I think in terms of figures, so we've engaged through this different activity, we've engaged with over 300 people so far, and then but obviously we're still waiting on next week's sessions as well. So I think they're currently on about 70 registrations for each, so hopefully we can get up to the kind of the 500 mark in terms of people that we've directly engaged with as a result of the promotional activity. So for the media work, so there were tailored releases that have gone out for national, regional, local trade press. So they obviously went out to promote the launch of the consultation. They went out to promote the TFN talk session, and they've gone out to promote the regional events as well. And there's a virtual video that's doing the rounds on social media as well. In terms of the website, we've had over 5,000 visits to the decarb page since it launched, and over 800 downloads of the strategy itself. So far we've just had an update yesterday of the completed applications, so we've not had too many at the moment in terms of completed, but we've had a lot of downloads of the hard copy forms, which I know a lot of the local councils are kind of passing those around to get their updates. But we've had about 131 people have registered, so we ask people to register when they fill out the form. So we've had 131 registrations, so people can go away and come back and fill it out at a later date. So I think, in short, I think that's probably about it at the moment. I'm conscious of time, so I'll see if there's any questions.
Okay, well, I'll start for a question, and then I can see Matthew's got a question. My question revolves around 2 things. The first one is, we asked that you deliberately sent this to all our council bodies to make sure, and so my first question is, are you getting a response from the local councils? Because I think it's a two-way process, because I think you're actually helping us write our decarbonisation strategies as well. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is there any sort of Facebook type thing you can send out? Because I'd be quite happy to promote this on my Facebook page, etc. And I have a couple of what I would call environmental ones, where again I would and not that I want to give you a lot of work to do, but we had a consultation a couple of years ago which I was quite passionate about, and we actually got something like 14,000 people to respond. So not that you probably want 14,000, but we can give you a little bit more attention if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of the, just going back to the Facebook, we have been heavily promoting it on Facebook, so we can send through some of the links there. I think quite a lot of people have registered for the events through Facebook. As a person, I'd be getting it promoted to me as well as somebody on Facebook, so I've definitely seen them out there, not just from the TFN side. So it's going really, really well. I think in terms of, sorry, I've forgotten the first question. I do apologise.
No, response from councils.
Oh yes, that was it. Yeah, so we sent a letter out to all of the individual councils of the north, so they've all received the formal notification to respond. We've had a. I'm not too sure how many of the councils have specifically responded to the consultation, because like I said, they're being collated independently in terms of the responses. But we definitely had quite a few that have come back and asked for, for more information and things like that. And I think Peter's doing a presentation for Allerdale on Friday, who came back and specifically asked for a bit more information. So it's definitely been engaged with within local councils, absolutely.
That's great news. Councillor Salter has the question for you.
Thank you, Chairman. Really more just a few comments on the future travel scenarios. The first is I can't understand why the first scenario, which seems to be the status quo, has been named just about managing. I mean, if it was named the status quo, that makes sense. But just about managing sort of brings associations of, okay, people who economically aren't in a brilliant situation. It just seems that it doesn't actually fit with what you're describing there. And also another comment that it's the point of that scenario seems to be it's what happens if change and developments and whatever continues to be focused on economic and purely economic growth and economic factors rather than market forces in general. I mean, there's no doubt if we leave things to just market forces, we won't get to carbon zero. But I would think that a lot of people are concerned about the environment, and as that is factored in more and more to market decisions, it's not necessarily the case that future behaviour will fit the sort of things that we've had happening up till now in terms of carbon CO2 production. Also, on the sort of seemingly ideal situation of urban zero carbon, it's not quite the ideal situation. I was just a bit concerned whether there was maybe a bit too much focus on sort of people living in cities and decarbonisation in that sense. It's vitally important in rural areas. Lots of people, you have to use a car, frankly, in order to do 90% of what you're going to do if you're living in the countryside. We've got lots of people living in the countryside, and there will continue to be lots of people who live in the countryside. So we can't just think about cities and the opportunities there. We also need to think about how can we make it easier in the countryside for people to make journeys on foot, by bike, by bus, by public transport. So I wouldn't want that to be forgotten either. And those really were my comments.
So just before either Peter or Stephen starts to answer Matthew's question, my first question to you, Matthew, is have you filled the consultation in?
Not just yet.
Because all those points, I think, need to go into the consultation. That's one of the key purposes of the consultation, and so that Peter knows which way to tune things accordingly. But over to you, Peter, or I think it'll be you, Peter, that's answering these. Thank you.
Sure. So, I mean, these are scenarios, and the reason we've adopted the scenarios is because we recognise that actually there isn't a certain way forward, and we want to test, if you like, the full range of parameters in terms of what might evolve in the future and the drivers of travel demand. And there would be a limitless number of scenarios that you could test, but we've taken 4 which we think represent, well, 2 at least, which represent extremes. So the just about managing and the urban zero carbon, and the other 2 with some nuances which, oddly enough, digitally distributed was sort of formed before the pandemic, but we've seen some of the key characteristics born over the last couple of years start to surface in that. And the reason we have those scenarios is to form our baselines. So and those give us, obviously, they give us our policy gap, and the policies that we then look at to try and bridge that policy gap to get us to our trajectory are, if you like, the really important element. So, for instance, I'm not going to comment on the name of just about managing. That was before my time, and I think there was a lot of discussion about it. But in terms of it taking into account sort of growing environmental awareness, I think you're right. Personally, I think that we've really massively seen that sort of ramp up. But in a situation where it doesn't ramp up, or national endeavour doesn't follow public endeavour, we want to know what are the sort of activities, what are the sort of actions that are going to be needed to fill that gap in that scenario, and that's why we have that one there. And again, with urban zero carbon, I sort of simplistically sort of ran through what was involved within that scenario, but each of the scenarios has a much fuller description within the Future Travel Scenarios report, which is available on our website, which is a really good read, actually, really interesting, and they cover off the sort of assumptions we're making around the growth in small towns, rural areas, cities for each of the scenarios. So absolutely, rural is really important. It's a baseline scenario. It's not a suggestion of a place we want to get to. The place we want to get to is the trajectory.
Peter, thank you very much. If Gary, you could send out either a link to that paper, the Future Travel Scenarios paper, etc., or we could actually send the paper out, I think that would be really useful. I very much like to thank Peter and Stephen for putting this together and for getting out there, and I'm hoping that they get plenty of consultation response, and I know, Matthew, you'll be no doubt sending plenty in. The one thing I would like to just say, having just finished a circular economy and sustainability course, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a lot of information on its website, and in particular, if you take a look at what's gone on in Peterborough, if you look for the case study of Peterborough City, which is what's to become a smart city, then you'll find some very interesting information that might well be worthwhile for your own city as to whether they're making good ideas or bad ideas, but at least it shows you a framework on how they're managing. And I think the important thing here is that we've actually got a series of frameworks and measures that then we can hold people to accountability for it. So I'd like to thank you, Peter and Stephen, and I'd like to just move on to the final item, if that is okay, which is, I think it's Tim W., Northern Powerhouse Rail update, please.
Thank you, Chair. The paper before you provides an update on progress to date on implementing the scope of work for the MPR programme for the financial year 21-22. It also updates the committee on progress on model development and sets out the plan to review and respond to the integrated rail plan. So 21-22 scope, grant funding, a budget of 75 million has been allocated to NPR programme for the current financial year by government. And this includes 48.5 million, against which we're progressing work in a number of areas, including design and capacity reviews of the Liverpool and Leeds hubs, studies to investigate opportunities for cost reduction and refinement of tram train proposals. We're also developing a train control strategy and modelling power supply systems. So in the pure modelling development, the Northern Rail Modelling System, so NORMS model, is used to calculate direct benefits to rail users and static wider economic benefits. You may have heard these referred to as level 1 and level 2 benefits. A major upgrade of the NORMS system has taken place, and I'm pleased to report that the work on this has been completed and the system is going through a detailed assurance process. 3 of the key challenges in iteration 2 compared to iteration 1 of NORMS are the following. So iteration 2 uses the Northern Highway Assignment Model, so NOAM model, to provide highway costs, resulting in better representation of the highway network than we previously had. It uses the 2017-18 as base year rather than the earlier 2015-2016 model year, and this results in stronger and more recent starting point for the forecasts of rail demand growth in the future. And the base model year demand has also been assembled to reflect the observed ticket sales data contained in the industry standard model of Moira 2. And that model which provides a more accurate representation of the rail movements between the major northern cities. A combination of the above factors is leading to an increase in benefits for the TfN preferred MPR network of approximately 30% over the previous model version. And this will of course flow into the benefits case and the BCRs and improve the overall economic viability of Northern Powerhouse Rail preferred scheme. Iteration 2 has been reviewed and signed off by the TfN expert panel, and which we are engaging now with the department to agree an analytical assurance statement which provides further assurance and endorsement of this model. Just on the strategic outline case now. So the business case team is progressing work in a number of areas that underpin the long-term delivery, as well as continuing to update sections of the strategic outline case. We're also undertaking scenario planning against a range of possible IRP outcomes so that we can assess the amount of work that will be required to complete the strategic outline case and the timelines associated with that. So the IRP response and review plan. So we've assembled a team within TfN led by Tim Foster and Louise Haywood from MPR to undertake a rapid review of the integrated rail plan and provide a synopsis to partners as quickly as possible after publication of the integrated rail plan. And of course, we will convene a discussion with board members and call a formal TfN board meeting if partners determine that is required. So currently, we still don't know when the integrated rail plan is coming out. Our suspicions could be pre-summer recess, so that's pre-23rd of July, if not probable then with the comprehensive spending review, so another 3-4 months time. So I'll end there, Chair. That's a quick update of where we are on Northern Powerhouse Rail.
Thank you very much, Tim. Does anybody have any questions for Tim's very thorough paper? Thank you. Looks like you're going to be led off, Tim, or maybe you just got caught early on the monthly operating report, and a lot of the questions were asked then at that stage. So I'd like to thank you very much for that presentation, and with that, I would like to close the meeting unless anybody has anything else to comment on. No, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, in which case I'll call on Gary to close the meeting, so don't stand up or anything.